Hi, and welcome to Marketer in the Middle. We're Valverde and Styles, and we're glad to bring you this little show.
That's right. Our guest today, our marketer in the middle, is none other than Nick Ayres. He's Director of Social at Georgia Pacific. Now, Nick and I have worked together on a couple of occasions, and he is knowledgeable about all things social marketing. So let's hear what he has to say.
Here we go.
It's been really interesting watching the evolution of social. You know, from when it first started, everyone kind of had an idea of what it was going to be and the potential for business and the potential for personal interaction, all that stuff. So where did we land with it? I mean, where does it fit now in the marketing ecosystem and the marketing technology stack?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think we're still trying to figure that out.
We're still evolving?
Yeah, you know, so I've been in this game almost 10 years, which is crazy to say out loud, to think that we've come to a point as an industry where 10 years is a possibility. But I do think we've come a long way, but I think the business is still trying to figure out, you know, is it just a communications tool? Is it an engagement tool? Is it really a more traditional marketing tool? And I think you find it falling in different places still in every business that you look at. So, you know, for me at Georgia Pacific, it sort of is in one camp. If you talk to 10 other companies in Atlanta, you may hear a different story.
So even after all that time, people are really not sure where it belongs in the organization. There's not like a set best practice of here's where it should live and here's how it should be used.
From my experience, yeah, that's accurate. I think you see kind of a smaller range, right? I don't run into conversations anymore where people are like, what is Facebook, right? Or what is what are these things, right? Everybody kind of knows what they are, but you still have, you know, different levels of comfortableness with those platforms or just sort of understanding how they plug in.
You're obviously with a large company with somewhat of a legacy kind of brand scenario. Younger companies that sort of started up in the social era in the last 10 years probably have a totally different approach to it because they embraced it from the beginning. Yeah. You've been on both sides of that fence, right? So
yeah, a little bit, yeah.
Compare that, I mean, where you see that changing.
To your point, if you're a relatively new company or a startup, you just embrace that from day one, right? I think the challenge on that side is how do you really tie a lot of the traditional social metrics that, you know, may or not be just vanity metrics to actual business benefits, right? So how do you think about as a startup, what is my Twitter presence or my Instagram presence or what I'm doing from a video perspective? How is that really moving me forward as a business? I think at a big business, and the other caveat to that is I think a lot of the smaller companies and startups just don't have a lot of money to play with in those spaces, right? And so we're approaching an era, Mike and I were talking about this a little bit earlier, where we're almost at that point where there's very little value in organic social content for most businesses anymore, right? And so
you may as well just take the like button out.
Yeah. So you know, as a startup, right, that puts you in a much more difficult position.
Yes, it does.
On the other side of the fence, as a big business, you know, you're going to have budgets, right? And most of our brands are willing to invest some level of money into what they do from a social perspective. So you have that kind of built in, but you do face a lot of the more traditional, like, okay, well, what role does this play, and how do we think about measuring it, and how's it really tying to the bottom line of the business? You've got to be really intentional about what makes sense for you and what content you have, what your business objectives are, all those sorts of things.
You talked about how organic is almost a lost cause, and this is always just, I mean, I've had a thorn up my you-know-what about Facebook and how in the beginning it had such promise that if I as a business made content that was good enough, I could put it out there and compete based on the quality of that content. Pages were built, we attracted fans, we built an audience, and then suddenly the gate came down and you've got to pay to access your own fans who asked to see the content that you're making. And so is organic just completely out of the picture, and has social for businesses become just another ad channel?
I think it depends on the platform. We candidly don't talk about Facebook as much about as a community or an engagement platform anymore. It really is a media channel, right? So there are very limited organic opportunities from my perspective. Even if you look at some of the bigger brands like Coca-Cola's or the Starbucks of the world, you know, if you look at their content cadence over the last, let's call it 18 months, you can see a pretty significant impact on the way they think about organic content. That said, I do think there is a place for organic, what I would call organic, and maybe some other platforms. If you think about, you know, some of what like Arby's and Wendy's is able to do on Twitter, and some of that traditional engagement.
where does social play a role in the B2B marketing side? You know, there's so much targeting going on through other channels now. Where do you see social playing a role?
There is a role for social in B2B. I think the evolution of social into B2B has been slower than it has been for B2C, and so I think a lot of these questions are still being answered at a much more rudimentary layer for B2B than it is for B2C. Sure. But I think when you think about B2B today, even I think your pool is largely going to be smaller. It's just not as much of a broadcast as maybe if you're trying to get to end consumers. But I think that does afford you an opportunity to step into some of the more traditional social elements. So that engagement model, building a relationship, thinking about sort of CRM and multiple touch points, right? Mm-hmm. And so what is the role that social plays in that? So, you're still not going to be in a world where, for most businesses that are B2B, where you're having this, super engaged conversation on a Facebook page, right? Like that just isn't the way the world is today. But I do think there are some opportunities, some of the newer stuff coming along with chatbots and that sort of stuff. I think there's some opportunity.
I was going to ask about the customer service element and whether people were successfully executing on that.
I do think there's a good opportunity there for both B2B and B2C, but particularly for B2B to use a service, use social as a service channel, whether it's Facebook or something else, to use social as a true lead gen engine that can be more detailed than just, hey, send us an email and we'll send you an off-the-shelf email that everybody gets.
Is there an academy around this that you're seeing people start to get more educated about how to do those kinds of things as organizations? Are they starting to think about, well, we really need to bring people that are on brand but also have the social native kind of approach?
I haven't seen an academy that sort of exists. I do see at a lot of our sort of peer organizations that being a focus of training organizations and HR and hiring organizations, and even education inside of like a marketing function to say, we need to make sure that our teams are aware and educated in these sorts of environments. And I think something we talk a lot about, or I talk a lot about, is sort of this idea of wearing your customer hat, right? Like I think as marketers in a lot of spaces, but certainly in social, we get sort of myopic about, okay, well, this is a great ad, it's a great video, it's a great spot, whatever it might be. But if I were watching
everyone internally.
Yes, exactly. But if you were on the other side, right? If I'm scrolling through my Facebook feed and I see this great video, am I going to stop and watch it? Yeah.
Exactly.
And I think the same is true from a service and interaction perspective. Like, what are my expectations of a consumer when I'm in those kinds of spaces, and how do I use what my belief is about that? If I were the consumer, how do I flip that and say, okay, well, what does that then require of me as a business person?
And kind of that same effect, it's using social to power all the way down through the funnel.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's generally been viewed, I guess, as a very top of the funnel type thing, and a way to broadcast and bring in leads, do lead gen. But it's that customer service element, especially on the B2B side. You might be able to use social to pull people down all the way through the funnel. But then again, I don't know if B2B C-suite people are, that active on social. Is that where they're,
Yeah, I mean,
interacting?
it would be fair to say that across the board, there is still a bit of a lag from a C-suite perspective in terms of their activity in social. And again, there are outliers, right? You've got a handful of folks at companies that are active there, but that's not the place that most CEOs are playing, for sure. And so there's both an education piece as well as just getting them comfortable with that sort of space. But you're right, it's not as active at the C-suite level.
Communicating as the brand is one thing, but then you also have your own profile. You have your own, social, especially in a LinkedIn environment, let's say. I mean, it's pretty hard to get stuff posted, and read from a brand. They really do want to see it from an individual and, an influencer or whatever the case may be. That's the missing link for B2B, is trying to figure out how to put those two things together, how to make brand ambassadors that, can stay on brand and, and still have other opinions, and participate in social in such a way that it feels organic and feels natural.
But when social was first getting started, I mean, that's why so many companies were so afraid of it, right? Because it's like, I don't want all these employees going rogue and posting, on behalf of the company. And so I don't know that ever did get fully figured out.
For that really to be effective, you have to believe in what your company stands for, right?
Exactly,
and so I think in the early days, it was easy to say, well, let's just push a bunch of stuff out and we'll give them some information to push out and all those sorts of things. But as the, social, as we as a society have grown up, like that, people see through that in a heartbeat, right? They know what's real and what's not. And so if you're just a corporate shill who's,
Yep.
you know, who you can tell from other behavior doesn't really believe what you're talking about,
Exactly.
it's going to get called out, right?
Exactly.
You're just
But-
exuding inauthenticity.
Yeah, but the flip of that, right, that again becomes at that sort of super high level, right, that businesses have to make their, what they stand for, what, you know, what they are about, what is important to them and to their shareholders and stakeholders. That has to be a core part of what's communicated at all times, and frankly has to, you know, show up in all of the other things and activities of that business.
So it's finding those people that get excited and can get, like you said, get the vision for the company, and then articulate it in a way that gets people excited. Because I think, you know, the one thing that's happened with social is that, you know, it's literally, you know, many to many. It's not the one to many broadcast kind of approach that we see.
Yep.
At least that was the promise of it. Now, of course, we're seeing, you know, this whole advertising model sort of take over. But I think B2B especially now has, you know, as they move into this, if they can move into it eyes wide open, you know, perhaps they can take advantage of it and, you know, have a few key spokespeople that are, you know, out there doing the things that they need to be doing that don't look like the shill, like you said.
Both at Georgia Pacific and previously at a couple other companies, there have been both somewhat formal and somewhat informal curriculums around, okay, well, how do we think about bringing this to life? And I know companies like Dell and a handful of others that I am aware of have very robust curriculums around it. So I think that's a piece of it. I think there's also a piece that, you know, you're starting to see a lot more companies lean into technologies that can support a curriculum, right? So thinking about, once we've sort of laid the foundation, how do we use technology and specifically mobile technologies to really enable our ambassadors, to enable folks, for it to be easy for them to share and to communicate, rather than making it a super cumbersome sort of process. And I do think, you know, in our world, it's certainly an easier conversation with a lot of our newer, younger hires, because it's something they're familiar with. It's a slightly different conversation for, you know, mid-level management, for senior executives. But I don't, from my perspective, like, and I have sort of joked about this in other contexts, but, you know, I think the nice thing about social early on, and part of what it made so much fun, was there were a lot of unknowns, right? And so you could try anything, right? Because nobody knew, right? But we are now to a point where there's a lot of stuff like, so yeah, that's not going to work, or yes, this is going to work. And what that means, a couple clicks down, is it's hard work, right? It is no longer just you're in the space for the fun of it. There's certainly that is there, but, you know, we're in a place where to get the customized education that matches multiple different personas inside of an organization, and to do the due diligence, to go through a vendor RFP and find the technology that works, like that's hard work, right?
Oh, yes,
and candidly, you know, that's not something that everybody signed up for.
But isn't the cat out of the bag? I mean, realistically, I mean, organizations haven't copped to that reality that, hey, wait a minute, social media is happening, and these people who work for me, you know, or with me, or however they want to say it, our team members, are on social media, and you know, it's clear that when they post on LinkedIn, their opinion is redounding to us in some way. Right?
Personal life,
you know,
and business life is a lot harder to keep apart.
Yeah, they've got to somehow, you know, at least educate people as to that reality that, hey, you are, whether you like it or not, you know, you represent us in some way. So please do these things. And of course, we see people on the negative side, people getting fired over something they did. You know, they can lose their jobs because, you know, at least the larger companies now all have the, you know, the agreement you have to sign that says, you know, that your behavior, you know, on social,
it's part of the policy.
It's policy, which is, again, I mean, all this stuff. I mean, if you've got the stick, you know, where's the carrot? You know.
Which also brings us to the last question, and perhaps you alluded a little to it earlier, is content. You know, the content that powers these social channels and the pipelines. We've got in a place now where we've figured out pretty much what works and what doesn't work, what's worth doing, what's not worth doing, but we still see trends happening like video performing so well, and you know, live video, and it just seems like, you know, people are wanting to watch, not so much read.
Yeah, no, I think video is at least the way of the immediate future when it comes to content. I think, you know, you can make a case that voice will play a pretty significant role in the not too distant future as well, but I think certainly from a social perspective, video and really short kind of snackable video is where you're going to see a lot of brands go. I think, you know, the distinction that I think is made is that, you know, and it sounds just trite and cliche as to say, but at the end of the day, people will watch long video if it's good, right? Like if you do a good job of telling the story and they have a reason and they are invested with that, it's not like that attention span has completely died. The problem is
it just has to be as good as Dunkirk the movie.
Exactly. You know? Yeah. It's got to be good, and so you know, again, I think for us where we talk about it is it's got to be used at the right places and in the right sort of situation. So you know, if you're somebody who doesn't know anything about one of our consumer brands, and we ask you to watch this 3-minute video about a brand that you don't like, that's a pretty big ask for most people, right? But if we ask, as an example, our Facebook audience, who, to your point earlier, people who have sort of raised their hand to say, we want to know about this brand, we're interested in the story of this brand. So asking that community to invest 3 minutes is a completely different ask.
Well, in the interest of keeping everything snackable, I guess we'll have to wrap it up, but we appreciate you being with us, Nick.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much,
for
Nick.
having me.
Thanks.
Appreciate it. So that's our show for the day. Thanks for joining us.
That's right. Now here's what you do. Go to marketerinthemiddle.com. That's where you can subscribe. Make sure you don't miss an episode and all the things that there are to learn. And also you can leave comments. Did you agree with Nick? Did you disagree with him? We want to hear from you there.
See you next time.